I just remember being extremely touched by his energy. And I believe he practiced Zen Buddhism. I was just actually, you asked, I was just in Japan with my friend Noelle, and we were going to a bunch of different temples, and we met a monk, a friend of a friend who like took us around and was sharing his experience about being a Zen Buddhist, and his energy really reminded me. I can feel a similarity.
Welcome to Driving Impact. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome to Driving Impact.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
We're so thrilled to be here. Super excited, especially about your background, because you're a musician, you're a cellist, a composer, and a singer. On top of that, you're a climate activist. You created a few not-for-profit organizations, which brought us to discover you. And then thirdly, you're a businesswoman. You also have built yoga businesses, and we want to hear all about it. So welcome to Driving Impact, Rebecca. And I'm so excited. And I was listening to your song with Patrick Watson, Vessel. And I met Patrick Watson back in the days in Montreal. Love his music and love the collaboration.
Called, right while we were, right when we started. Yeah. Oh, that's so nice.
He knew that we were going to talk about him. Knew I was listening to the song. It's it's amazing career, and you also won a couple of Junos because you work with different bands as well.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. I'm so happy to be here.
So we're so excited. So I think I wanted to start. So you have a long list of accomplishments, which we will unfold in the next hour. But I really wanted to start at the beginning, and it's a question that we ask at Driving Impact to every single guest: is how were you as a kid? So we want to go back to little Rebecca. Who did you want to be when you were growing up?
It's so sweet. Well, I was really lucky because I went to a public school that had a music program, a strings program in particular. So I don't think I really knew anything, but like fumbling around life and getting introduced to things helped me kind of find new passions and inspirations. So I was really lucky that I went to this public school that had a string program, and I saw little kids playing the cello because I don't come from a musical background in terms of my family. Yeah. So my parents are writers and in the arts but not in music. And so I really distinctively remember being 8 or maybe like 6 years old and seeing the cello for the first time and totally falling in love with the cello.
Was it your first instrument that you got in contact with?
It was the first one I got in contact. I always loved the piano, but I never took lessons as a kid. But the cello really hit me hard when I saw it. And I was so lucky because I had the choice to be able to take lessons and learn it as a kid through my public school. So I always knew I wanted to be a musician because of that. And I fell in love with improvising as a kid as well. So
I pause you a second? I want to know what was the moment when you saw the cello for the first time?
I distinctively remember being in at recess at 6 years old outside playing. I'm from Vancouver, so I was playing outside in Vancouver with the kids, and I remember seeing the bigger kids because it started in grade 4, the string program. And I distinctively remember the bigger kids carrying the cello. It was like such a striking instrument, right?
It's huge.
Like the bass is huge, the cello's less huge, but it's still huge. But you can put it as a backpack, and it kind of like eats up the whole kid, from the back. And I just distinctively remember being like, what is that? And then seeing the kids rehearse in the hallways and seeing the cello. And there was something about the cello, about it being like almost human size. And
it's so big. It's like a little kid that a kid would carry on their back.
Exactly. And I just fell in love with the sound, and the sound is so close to the human voice. And I just remember it resonating with me in my heart. Like I was like, wow, what is that instrument? So moving.
So that's love at first sight. So love at first sight. So from that moment, you knew you were going to play the cello. But did you know
I knew I had the opportunity, and I could convince my parents, who very much thought it was a bad idea, because they're like, why would you play the cello when you can play the violin? It's so much smaller. Yeah, so my sister plays violin.
So they were like, just do like your sister, play violin. It's small. We already have all the structure for success. Like, no, I want to play cello. And they're like, okay, that's going to take a lot of
Yeah.
space. It's going to be loud.
She's actually younger, so she got, I think she got pushed into the violin at a young age, but fell in love with the violin, so it's all good.
Is she a musician now?
Yeah, she's a musician as well, classical music. She's amazing classical musician and composer.
So both of you. That's amazing.
Yeah, and we actually, just to bring it up, we started playing music. She's 16 years younger than me. And
Okay.
so just recently we started collaborating together, and we just made our first album together that will be coming out this year. So
What is the name of the album? Give us the scoop.
I don't know if we have the title yet, but we'll see. We're still working on it, but it'll be out most likely in December.
In December
Yeah,
2024. Stay tuned. So,
Stay tuned.
like Rebecca Foon and
Alieta Foon Denkos.
It's a beautiful name.
Yeah.
Well, we're excited. Cannot wait to hear the collaboration. So you had this first pivotal moment where you fell in love with the cello, and you knew you were going to play the cello. And then what other pivots brought you to have a musical career?
Like musical career? Well, I remember going to Banff. Do you know Banff Center of the Arts in Canada? Yeah, and I remember going there in high school, and I was lucky. I went with like a whole group of cellists, and we were there to learn classical music. But then also there was some teachers there that were interested in improvisation. And so because I was studying, my background is classical, I had no taste of improv or jazz or anything other than classical. And so when I was there, I tasted improvisation and like really fell in love with improv. And I distinctively remember that moment because I knew I wasn't my road was not classical to go down the classical path. But because I played cello, it's a confusing road, especially at that time in the 90s when there wasn't like a whole world of music, especially in the cello string landscape outside of classical music.
So you were going to follow this very classical path. But
then that's all I knew. Yeah. And so being introduced to improv made me realize like, wow, I actually have a love here and a desire to explore music outside of classical music. And so
because not everybody can feel like comfortable, free flowing and not just following the partitions. And that's
exactly.
You felt a calling of like, I want to improv, I want to go with the flow, I want to see where it's going to bring me, I want to create like that.
Yeah, I felt a calling, and and it came naturally to me. And so that's where I started playing with band. I distinctly remember seeing Nirvana play when I was in high school, and they had a cellist, and it was the first time that I ever saw a cello player playing with a band. It was before, I think they were getting famous, but it was still like a pretty small venue. And so I was like right up close watching the cellist play with Nirvana. And I was like, whoa, you can do that? Yeah. You can play cello in a band?
That's cool.
I want to join a band. And so after that, I found a band in high school, and then moved to Montreal and started playing with like dancers, and joined a punk rock band and started like entering the music world. But I also distinctively remember taking a masterclass with Yo-Yo Ma in high school. And he also was kind of pivotal to, even though he's like very much in the classical world, he's such a creative thinker and really thinks outside of the box in terms of.
So how did you get across this class given by Yo-Yo Ma?
I was just lucky because I studied at the conservatory in Vancouver, and they brought him in to do a masterclass with the cellists studying at the conservatory at the time. And he was so humble. I just remember I went up to him after because he was played some Bach cello suites and different things, but just the way he was talking about like architecture and music and space and energy, and I just hadn't heard anyone talk about music so creatively and holistically and open, and it moved me so much. And I went up to him after and was like, that was so incredible, you inspired me so much. And he was so humble and was so generous and was like, are you sure that was okay? Do you think I did an okay job? Like, what?
Yo-yo ma experiencing self-doubt.
Exactly. And I'll never forget it. There was something about that interaction that just moved me so profoundly and shaped my desire to explore. It really opened up my curiosity about music and like growth as an artist and
Yeah, and
humility and
from what you said, it feels like he was talking about music, cello, but also he was talking about architecture and the arts, right? So it
yeah,
was like a multi-hyphenate in terms of fashion. Sometimes you're an
exactly.
artist, but you're an artist in multiple genres. And just like
Exactly.
you, what brought you to here where you are today. So you had this first cello encounter, then you met with Yo-Yo Ma and you took a class with him. So
Yeah.
what brought you to move from Vancouver to Montreal?
So interesting. Yeah. It's funny. I was actually just talking to my sister about this, about destiny, if there is a destiny, because I had applied to 5 universities. I knew I wanted to go to university. And one of them was in Vancouver, and they were all in Canada. And the only one I didn't get into was Vancouver. And if I
Hmm.
had gotten it was UBC. And if I'd gotten into UBC, I would have stayed in Vancouver. But so the other ones were in like Kingston and Toronto and Montreal, and I knew like of those cities I wanted to be in Montreal.
Yeah.
So I was kind of Montreal chose me in a sense because I didn't get into the university I would have stayed in or would have gone to.
It forced you out of the nest, and that's where sometimes you
Exactly.
create different paths and experiences. You're exposed to the French language, of course, from Quebec, but also the
Yeah,
culture.
exactly. Yeah.
And so, which school did you go to in Montreal?
So I went to McGill and I did general arts there, but I also did music technology,
Hmm.
um, a double degree, and that was really interesting because I chose to not go into classical. I wasn't quite good enough to like. I knew I wasn't quite good enough to because classical music is so competitive,
Yeah.
and I had started at 8 years old in a public school program with kind of a crappy teacher, and then and then I went to the conservatory and had to relearn all my technique and everything. I was I had I was behind the game. Like I wasn't
It's
competitive with all those kids starting at 3, right? With
it's
like the best teacher. And
it's so competitive, and I'm saying yes, yes, because I started piano when I was like 4 or 5, and
yeah.
played until I was 18, and I never became good. So, but I'd
Oh,
never
so
stumbled into
hard.
pop music or jazz or fun stuff. So it was always Chopin and Mozart and
Yeah,
stuff.
interesting. Right. Well,
So
never
I
too late.
understand because you go to just
Yeah.
all of these shows, and it's like there's those kids who are just like very technical and very like they feel like they're geniuses, but they have
Yeah.
worked early. They start very early playing piano or whichever classical instrument, and they become masters very early. So I understand what you mean by saying, you went to McGill, but you didn't choose a classical part because it's extremely technical as well. But I also feel like your
Exactly.
heart was a bit like wanted to explore different genres than just classical music as well.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, like coming back to that idea of like one's path, and because I was heartbroken that I had started at cello at the age of 8, and not at the age of 3 or 4, like for
Mm,
years and years and years, because it's like those 4 or 5 years kind of cost me my classical career in my head. And for years, I was heartbroken. I would see at McGill in the music, because I was in the music school, I would see all these students studying performance, and I felt like it hurt my heart because I was like, oh man, I like never had that chance. But it's so interesting because I really like in today's world, I don't have that heartbreak anymore because I know that path was
yeah,
not my path. So it's almost like there was
yeah,
something protecting me to not have
yeah.
started cello at 3 years old. It's so funny.
Because I was gonna say, does it matter, right? So we have some
Yeah.
famous actors who start when they're like 60 years old, and that's
Yeah,
when they start their career. And I know music,
exactly.
it's a different story, but there's a principle of like, let's say you start today playing music, don't think about the next year, think about the next 40 years, and that gives you a bit
Exactly.
more room to become a master eventually. But I think this pressure of making everything happen in the first 3 to 5 years is extremely heavy.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if I had pursued classical, I don't know if I would have ever found my love of composition and singing and exploring creating music as opposed like and I mean composing music.
And then let's
So
talk a little bit about the bands because you went to
yeah,
university
sure.
and then how did you meet all of these bands and launch yourself? How did
Yeah,
you start
so
your musical career from, because school is very different than performing and launching albums and getting a record deal.
So I remember there's a dance program at Concordia, and I was starting to get asked to play with dancers at Concordia, and that's where I started like composing on the cello, and I really loved dance as an expression, as an artistic platform for emotion and also inspiration for composing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I met a group of women that had this punk band called Queen Size Shag, and they asked me to play cello in it. And so I started playing with them. And then we were rehearsing at this loft on Van Horn in Mile End in Montreal called
I
Hotel de
love the
Tango.
Myland.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, isn't it?
It's so
No.
gorgeous.
Anyway, so I was starting to rehearse at Hotel de Tango, and I don't know. Do you know the band Godspeed, You Black Emperor from
Mm-hmm.
Montreal? So they were rehearsing there as well, and so I started to meet some of them, and Ephraim, who's in Godspeed, eventually asked me to. He said he had started this new project called Silver Mount Zion, and and then asked me to join it, and so that's how I kind of fell into playing with Silver Mount Zion, and I was in that band for 8 years, I think, in Montreal through my 20s, through all of my 20s. And then while playing with Silver Mount Zion, I started also doing like some other projects like Esmerine,
Mm-hmm.
who,
Which won a Juno.
yeah, just this year and a few years ago too, with my friend Bruce. We co-founded it together, who was the drummer in Godspeed at the time.
It's not a small feat.
Oh,
Win
thank
a
you. That's so nice.
Juno Award in Canada.
I'm
Yeah.
so grateful because that album, we wrote it while my mom was dying of cancer. And so it was quite a sad time. And that album is dedicated to my mom, and she passed away. And then we won the Juno. And it felt like, if there's any album to win a Juno, it felt very, very moving that like
Yeah.
it touches, it just feels like a way of, she loved music. And I feel like I can
Mm-hmm.
connect with her on some spiritual level through music. So it's just very sweet that that album was one of them that won the Juno.
It's like an honor for her as she's moving away from life, right? That you
Yeah,
were able to
exactly.
leverage all that energy, create that album, and the emotions from the journey as well. Congratulations.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other people that you met that were pivotal in your career? Because sometimes it's like there's
For music?
people, yeah, who leave a big
Yeah.
impression on you, and then you find your path, your calling, however you want to call it, your purpose, or your next step in your career.
Well, there's maybe two in particular. One, I remember being in the studio with Silver Mount Zion, and
Mhm.
Leonard Cohen had heard that we were recording in the studio, and I think he was kind of like interested in at the time, I think he was 74, and he was just making his last album, I think it was the last album, and he was putting together a band to take on tour. And if I remember the story correctly, I think there was an article that came out that said Silver Mount Zion and Leonard Cohen should make an album together, or he had like heard about Silver Mount Zion or something, like read something that made him want to come to the studio, and so he came to the studio, and he came
That's a
2 days
big
in a row,
deal.
and he watched us record for 3 hours, and then came back the next day. And my partner at the time was also in Silver Mount Zion, and I remember he sat with him, and like Cohen told him his whole story in terms of like the last few years, and his manager like told us all sorts of things. And but he was so, again, like Yo-Yo Ma, there was something about him that was just so humble and
Yeah.
elegant with his little hat, and like
Yeah.
he kept getting off the couch and offering me a seat, and it
So
was
Leonard Cohen just decided to squat your recording
recording
sessions,
session.
and nobody's gonna kick him out because it's like, hey, it's Leonard Cohen.
Yeah, even though everyone's like a bit grumpy and like trying to compose, and it's like, oh god.
Did you feel the pressure of recording when he was in the room?
I just remember being extremely touched by his energy. And I believe he practiced Zen Buddhism. I was just actually, you asked, I was just in Japan with my friend Noelle, and we were going to a bunch of different temples, and we met a monk, a friend of a friend who like took us around and was sharing his experience about being a Zen Buddhist, and his energy really reminded me. I can feel a similarity
What was
to,
the energy like?
an observation of like kind of sitting back from your life and observing the situation, observing the energy, the human experience, the human emotions,
I feel
and
like wisdom.
a wisdom and a profound depth that
Yeah.
comes through that. And that really hit me, that energy. And it's, so I guess like the Yo-Yo Ma energy was more like a creative, open energy, and a humility. And Leonard Cohen's energy was more like, it definitely felt like a meditative practice, like an observation and a peacefulness
So he was at peace. He was in the moment. He was
in the
really
moment.
truly listening. So he was present and he was
Yeah, very,
absorbing
very
the
present in his
music.
life and the experience around him. It's very profound, subtle and profound. It's
And you
interesting.
still remember to this day this,
That energy.
the energy, transformative experience.
Yeah,
It's interesting
exactly.
how energies can lift you up or drain you. And that was a very, like some of the very successful musicians that you talked about have
Yeah.
found a way to sit with themselves and have this prevalent Zen, enlightening energy and peace.
And I think being intimate sometimes with a person, even if it's just for a few hours in life, it can transform. You can taste something that you can hold dear in your heart and keep with you. That can transform your journey. In that band, we played with Patti Smith a few times. We did a few shows with Patti Smith.
And can you
And
tell us who's Patti Smith? I want to make sure everybody knows.
yeah, well, she's an amazing, legendary icon musician from the States and currently living in New York. And Ornette Coleman, at the time he was alive, a famous jazz musician, had asked to do. There's this Meltdown series. I don't know if it still exists, but I don't think it exists anymore. But this Meltdown series in London, where they would ask someone to curate a festival, and Ornette Coleman had invited Patti Smith, and Patti Smith had invited Flea and Silver Mount Zion and a few other, Adrian Utley, I think, a few other from Portishead, a few other musicians. And Patti is just such an incredible inspiration because she has such a prolific career in terms of music and art and photography and writing, prolific writer, beautiful writer. Anyway, and her daughter, Jessie Paris Smith, was at this concert, this second concert that we had done together. And so I met Jessie, and Jessie was very interested in climate change. And
Okay.
and
When was that? What were the
this
years?
was
Because
2009 in London.
2009. So you went into that. So multiple musicians, and hearing your stories, like similar birds flock together. One musician invited the other band, who invited the other band, and all of these people were hanging out, and that's where you met Jessie, who
Yeah,
is a climate activist. So tell us more about that encounter.
yeah. So I remember distinctively seeing her at the piano and being so moved by her piano playing, and I was so struck by her energy as well. And then we connected, and just as like we exchanged contacts and just connected musically because we were performing together with her mom.
Okay.
And then I came back to Montreal, and years went by, and but we kept in touch, and we both noticed that each other were very interested in climate change, like through Facebook and through
Social media.
social media. Yeah. So then in 2014, there was the climate march, and in New York City, and it was the biggest climate march that had existed at the time. It was like a huge deal, and hundreds of thousands of people taking the streets. And she wanted to organize a concert, and so she asked me if I wanted to help her put on this concert. And I said, like, absolutely. I'm so interested in integrating music with climate change. Yeah. And so we decided to like pull together last minute, 4 days before the march, pull together this tiny concert at the Poisson Rouge in New York City, this venue in the basement in the West Village. And we invited a bunch of people, like cold called Bill McKibben, who said yes, and Michael Stipe from REM, and Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth.
Wow.
It was amazing. And Patti was there, and we were there, and it was just like an incredible evening that came together very quickly. And it was the first time we met Bill McKibben. And we did this event, and we were just very inspired by what Bill had to say, and also just the energy of all these people that just cared so much. And we were like kind of like tapping into a collective energy of artists,
like being people being conscious all at the same time during the march and wanted to connect via music. I like the fact that the name of the bar is Le Poisson Rouge.
I know.
In French, in New York. So you put it together at this Poisson Rouge venue. We had like celebrities for REM, Billy, you like, and what happened at that moment?
Yeah, so it was just we felt like we tapped into kind of almost like a collective consciousness, or a desire to help build or fuel a movement around the importance of really talking about climate change, because this is 2014, so this is before the Paris Agreement. And so then we realized, and through Bill, he wrote this article in the Rolling Stone about how the December talks in Paris in 2015 around the Paris Agreement were like the most important talks, and like everything we need to be doing right now, the
moment.
Exactly. And everything that we can do right now as a society and as an individual needs to be around like propelling this forward. And so we decided to we called it Pathway to Paris. And
so that's one of the nonprofits.
And that's one of the nonprofits. Yeah, exactly. And so we
from this Poisson Rouge, and I want to make sure for the audience that people know who Billy is. Sorry, it's my French accent.
Or Patti, or Bill McKibben.
Billy McKibben.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so he wrote the first book on climate change, and he is a prolific writer. He writes a lot for the New Yorker and has written many, many books. And he also has a Substack that I highly recommend if anyone's interested to check out, where he talks about.
We'll link it in
in
the episode.
Yeah, amazing. Anyway, he's an incredible thinker, writer, and he was started 350.org. And now Third Act, which is another nonprofit dedicated to activating seniors in climate politics and climate engagement, basically.
That's amazing. So 2014, everybody's at the Poisson Rouge. People are marching in the streets. It's right before the Treaty of Paris. And now the Paris Agreement is happening. And that, like, just you were in that perfect moment in that collective awareness to also launch the Pathway to Paris. Who did you launch this not-for-profit with?
With Jessie, with Patti's daughter. So Jessie Paris Smith. So we did it together from the beginning, and we decided we wanted to put on this big concert in Paris during the climate talks in December 2015 to try to push for the Paris Agreement to be established, because it wasn't established, and we were nervous. I remember after what happened with Copenhagen before with the COPs, I was really nervous at the time that the Paris Agreement would not, and Kyoto, like looking at the history of it all.
It looked grim.
It looked, yeah, exactly. And so we wanted to do whatever we can while integrating arts and culture into the movement to try to really push for the Paris Agreement to be established. And so we put 2 concerts on in Paris on December 4th and 5th in 2015, and brought people from all around the world, including Tom York. And Radiohead was like just about to put out a new album, and Tom York performed some songs from the album that were like no one had heard yet. Patti and Flea were there, and Naomi Klein and
Oh,
Vandana
wow.
Shiva, and Bill McKibben. Anyway, a whole group of people. But it was a very interesting moment because there was the Bataclan attacks, and the whole city got shut down. And we
At that
thought
same
for
moment?
sure. Yeah, it was right before. I think it was like December 1st or something. It was
So
very,
3 days before the
yeah,
concert.
or maybe a week before. It was very soon. We can look it up, but it was very soon. It was right before it all happened. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, are we going to have to cancel?
Yeah.
We had 2 sold out concerts, and like it was crazy. And the whole city got shut down, but somehow we were allowed to still do our concerts. And
So you still were able to do your concerts even though there's
yeah,
still a shutdown. How many
yeah.
people attended to these concerts?
It wasn't huge. It was at this venue called Le Trianon, so it was a few thousand per night. But we live streamed it and did a whole bunch of press around it. So
That's
when the
amazing.
Paris Agreement was established, it was a huge celebration for us. We were so happy because we had just put so much energy into try to like highlight the importance of
And
it
it's
being
it's
established.
important. And I want to go back to understanding what Pathway to Paris does. And I
Yeah,
put some notes here. So Pathway to
yeah,
Paris, you want to create a sustainable world, one city at a time, with a focus on getting cities 100% fossil fuel free by 2040. That's
yes,
very, very ambitious. And
yes,
also like referring back to the Paris Agreement, where the Paris Agreement, the goal is to really get to limit global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius,
yeah,
which is the goal. So now we talked about the origin of Pathway to Paris, understand about the concert, but like spending some time trying to understand what exactly you do. I played with the 1,000 Cities Carbon Freedom Calculator. I mean, I love
yeah.
calculators. I thought it was
Oh,
great. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about carbon. And for our audience, we had multiple interviews with multiple guests, and
yes,
most people agree that climate change and climate action is overly complex for people to take the actions that they could take, which could be simplified.
yeah.
So let's talk about carbon. And I want to make sure that you're going to be the teacher, I'm going to be the student.
Okay. I'll
First
try my best.
concept, carbon budget. And
Yeah.
researching this, I thought it was super interesting. So we have to imagine the earth as if it was a giant bank.
Hmm.
A giant bank account, and then carbon budget being like a financial budget for the Earth's atmosphere. And then it's a way to track how much carbon dioxide, CO2, are the main greenhouse gas causing climate change are emitting. So, and how many we can emit before reaching a dangerous level of global warming. So that's the
Yeah.
overarching concept of having a carbon budget. Now, with the carbon freedom calculator, how do you
Hmm.
assign a carbon budget by country? How did we
Yeah,
decide France
exactly.
versus Canada versus the United States?
So yeah, so our carbon budget calculator is linked to the whole concept of aligning with the Paris Agreement of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees
Hmm.
above pre-industrial levels, which is getting more and more challenging as the years go by, right? Because more and more emissions are getting put into the atmosphere, and
It's kind of a moving target.
yeah, exactly. So when we established this calculator is now a few years old, and our targets of 2040 were established in 20. We launched Thousand Cities in 2017 at the UN.
Hmm.
Um, in order to limit global temperature rise to 1.5, we came up with those targets of that. If cities can come up with climate action plans and implementation strategies that go net zero by 2040, then we can meet this target of 1.5.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea of what you're talking about with a global carbon budget, it's the maximum amount of allowable emissions. And for us with this calculator, that's connected to 1.5 of
Okay.
limiting global temperature rise to 1.5.
So basically, did you calculate how much each city is producing, and then they have a target in terms of reduction to withdraw or like reduce that
Exactly.
CO2 in the air? And so that's what you did. And then how is
So
it
in
going?
order to meet 1.5, but there's one other little equation. A part of that is a fair share idea of that. So if we look at if the world is like a pie and all the countries have a little bit of the pie in terms of emissions that they're allowed to emit, um, So a fair share understanding of it is looking at also what emissions have happened in the past for
Hmm.
each country. So because so many countries, so for example, the United States or Canada have emitted way more emissions than, say, a country in Africa. And also looking at the current wealth of a country.
Yeah.
So it's fair share idea. It just means that countries like, for example, America or Canada would have more aggressive targets because if you look at the past and the emissions that they've already put into the
They're
atmosphere,
emitting more than some of the smallest countries. And some of the
and
stats talk about the fact that the impact is oftentimes on the smaller countries or continents that
exactly,
don't have as many resources as the big
exactly,
countries, the Canada, US, the UK. But then
yeah,
we're all emitting more than the small countries. And the other countries are
they
still
have more resources to
yeah,
put
to solve the
towards it
problem.
to solve the problem. Exactly, yeah.
Do you see, like, what is the progress made so far since you launched the calculator?
Well, there's been a lot of progress. So as we've seen, like climate change is much more in the news. It's much more mainstream. Like
Hmm.
most people know now what the Paris Agreement is. At the
Yeah.
time, I felt like nobody knew what the Paris Agreement was, or the COPs, the United Nations meetings every November around um, climate change, um, and also climate action plans. So a big part of what Pathways mandate is to support cities in developing climate action plans that are ambitious and best practice plans,
Hmm.
and putting those into implementation to cut emissions and to go eventually net zero. And so now there's a lot more funding, like America in the States, there's now a ton of funding going into supporting cities to
Hmm.
create climate action plans. So that because of funding, that's allowing the movement to grow in terms of cities actually creating climate action plans because it's expensive to create a climate action plan because you have to look at greenhouse gas emissions per sector and develop a lot of models and
So who
um,
who does that? Who creates a climate? Is it like a consulting firm that's like, okay, I'm going
yeah,
to
it's
create
usually
your.
consulting firms. And so Thousand Cities has a technical team
Hmm.
of climate consultants that help support cities that are in need of support in terms of developing climate action plans. But now we're getting to a point where a lot of cities are actually making climate action plans. And so
Hmm.
we're kind of entering a second phase now where it's really about turning these climate action plans into implementation because we're running out of time, right? It's always a race against time. This whole
So,
problem is
so
a
they
race
took
against
what?
time.
How many years? They took 5 to 8 years just to create the plan,
To create the plans and
the
still
climate action plan, and now they're like, okay, we're gonna get started.
now we got to meet these targets,
Oh
which
my
is a
goodness.
whole other thing, right? Because it costs billions of dollars to help a city go off
Yeah,
of to transition off of fossil fuels because we're really like moving out of a whole era of fossil fuels into a renewable era. And
it's a
so
paradigm shift, right? It's kind of like
exactly,
industrial revolution brought us all this amazing. I mean, not amazing, brought us all of these processes that now we realize are detrimental to the earth, and then
exactly,
re-engineering these hundreds of years of industrial revolution. Like that's what I'm hearing from you is that they have to figure out with all the infrastructures that they have to create a plan that's actually going to help reduce carbon emission, but knowing that all of our society is relying on the old infrastructure.
exactly. And a lifespan of a building is usually around 100 years or more. And so when a city puts a lot of money into building a building or a bridge or whatever it is, you have to consider that this is going to be there for a long time. So it's way
Yeah.
more efficient. So now, in terms of new construction, it's really an opportunity for cities to think about everything that's being built. There's all the
Mhm.
retrofits that need to happen, but also um, new development that needs to be thought about in terms of an opportunity to go
Yeah.
help make that shift out of the era of fossil fuels into a renewable era.
So that's the exciting part is that moving forward, the cities could decide to build differently, such that the buildings are like net zero emission proof, they can be LEED certified, etc. I think looking backwards of everything that was built before, have you heard any stories of like good transformation of taking old buildings or old processes and making sure that they can emit less carbon.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many different sectors involved in this, but in terms of the green building sector, absolutely. There's a whole lead building started it with green building in terms
Mhm.
of looking at coming up with a whole standard system in terms of buildings,
Mhm.
either new construction, new development, or LEED for homes. And so being able to standardize a green building practice. And that's one thing we're trying to do now too, is create, and this is starting to become part of the language of creating a rating system in
Yeah.
essence, not only buildings, for example, but for cities. And
Mhm.
so, and looking at cities' plans and rating them in terms of like gold status or platinum, silver, or different
Yeah.
to see where they're at, right? Because it is this race against time, and you can even like when we look at like an amazing climate action plan, it can be an amazing climate action plan, or it might need to be way more amazing, and so energy needs to go into improving the targets and becoming more ambitious. But then it's like putting that plan into action, which requires
It's
so
always a
much
difficult
time.
part. Yeah, it's always because basically like it's kind of there's a gap, and the gap
Yeah,
is we're emitting too much CO2, and then we have to figure out how can we change the gap, how we can close
yeah,
the gap. But then we're dealing with things and institutions that have taken centuries to be built. So how do
yeah.
you turn it around? So were you able to create this rating system for cities?
We're
Or
actually, this is what we're working on right now. Is
okay,
Yeah. And because there are now so many cities that have created climate action plans with ambitious targets, some more than others, but right, that's what we want to focus on now, is supporting cities on either improving their climate action plans and also looking at how we can support them in terms of putting those plans into implementation.
yeah, I think it's the future of sustainable cities. The future of cities
Yeah.
is top of mind. Would love to hear any stories that you have, Rebecca, about cities that have either created great climate action plans or implemented a couple of elements in their climate
Mhm.
action plan. We just want to dream about what the future could look like for
Yeah,
sustainable
I
cities.
know. I'm so happy you asked this question, because I really do think it comes down to the human imagination at a certain point, because we're
Yeah.
talking about creating a world that's beyond what exists now.
Hmm.
And so I really do believe like children and with incredible imaginations, and children are also going to be here for so much longer than us,
Yeah.
that it needs to, and I love like Bill McKibben, he with what he started with the movement with 350, and then Third Act, getting people 60 and over involved in the conversation. Like I really do believe it needs to come from the people, but it also needs to be implemented within the political sphere, the municipal sphere, as well as the federal sphere, but definitely within the communities and cities, municipalities that we live in. And so a big part of that is dreaming up what does New York or LA or Montreal, what do these cities look like not using any fossil fuels? It's a huge
Yeah.
opportunity.
We had a
Huge
guest who talked about cities were not built for humans. And I said, like, what were they built for? She's like, cars. I don't know
opportunity.
cars
Oh my
because
god.
I live in LA and it's like, it's even when I was in the Bay Area,
Yeah,
you just, the massive highways, everybody has to get in a car. You can drive an EV, which are now more affordable, but we're still
yeah,
in the same structure of the city. Some people get excited about flying cars, but I'm like, oh, and then the air
uh,
is going to be filled with things that are floating. So what does it look like, Rebecca? Like the future of cities, like paint us a picture of a sustainable city, what it could look like, or
yeah.
if somebody has done something great that you could share.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I think that's something I'm very interested in now, is also getting into visualization to help inspire this conversation of modeling out um, dream ideas of cities,
Hmm.
and especially in terms of the built environment, because I think we can get so creative with foresting the built environment in innovative ways that allow also for um, like incredible bicycle paths and alternative
Hmm.
transportation, um, and really innovative buildings that are creating microgeneration, or just really helping with reducing greenhouse gas emissions in terms of energy. But yeah, so I think in terms of inspiration, greening cities in terms of urban agriculture and forests and flowers and just like bringing wildlife back into cities is very inspiring. Connecting humans more with nature within the urban landscape. I think we
I
can
think
do
that
a
would be
lot there.
amazing. Yeah, like how
That's
can
kind of
we?
where my attention is starting to move with, along with like the low hanging fruits of reducing greenhouse gas, cutting greenhouse gas emissions and trying to get there. But sorry, but yeah.
No, 100%. Like solar panels, having more EV cars, and reshaping how like even our highways are built, figuring
Yeah.
out community gardens, but also more green spaces. I think it's a total shift. I was in New York, I'm in LA, and I was in Montreal. I was so surprised because I don't go as often back to Montreal that there were bike paths in the east part of town where my family lives. I'm like, nobody's ever on a bike there, but I like it. I think it's, and in New York,
Yeah.
they did that a couple of years ago, where for me it was a shock looking at all the bike paths in New York and how they put more greening on the side of the roads. But I think there's going to be way more than that we need to do to be able to transform the way that we're living. We had another guest talked about like your grass, what you should have a native grass and etc.
Mhm.
So I'm excited to see. And we talked about also multi-generational living. How can we think differently about the spaces where we live in? How can we have borrowing space and multiple generations and having more of a community type of life? So that's super interesting. I want to make
That's
sure that we
beautiful.
have time to talk about the other not-for-profit that you founded. That's
Yeah.
called Jungle Keepers. And it's,
Wonderful.
from what I understand, it's dedicated to protecting the Peruvian Amazon. So can you tell us a bit more about this origin story
Yeah.
of Jungle Keepers?
Absolutely. So I started with two friends, a couple yoga studios in Modo. It's called Modo Yoga in New York City, in
Yes,
Williamsburg and the West Village.
I
And when we
love
first
Williamsburg.
started, oh yay,
But back in the days when it was like nothing and there was one spot that was cool.
so different now, totally.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so we got this email from this guy named Paul Rosalie, who had just written this book called Mother of God. And he was talking about the Madre Dios region in the Peruvian Amazon and how we need to protect this area because it's one of the most biodiverse places left on planet
Hmm.
Earth. And he was like, can we start doing some yoga retreats here to raise awareness and some fundraisers to help protect this area? And I had always wanted to go to the Amazon and work on. I've always been interested in conservation, and I've always
Yeah.
wanted to like get involved, but I had no idea how. So
I
immediately
think
I
it's a
had,
good place to start.
yeah,
One of the biggest and most important places in the world for
yeah, the lungs,
conservation. So that's how it,
the
like
river
Jungle Keepers got started.
started exactly. And so we went there and met Paul and fell in love with this area and fell in love with the trees. And we did see some logging and like of ironwood trees and some,
Illegal logging? Are you referring
yeah,
to?
some
Yeah,
illegal logging. It was just so heartbreaking because I'd never seen trees this enormous before. I'm from
yeah.
BC and I've been to like Clayoquot Sound, and that actually got me into activism and very interested in environmentalism. But when I went to the Amazon and seeing some of the deforestation, I like it was just so, it just killed me. I was like, oh my God.
It's heart-wrenching, like massive trees that have like multiple
Yeah,
centuries under their belt being
exactly.
chopped off.
Exactly. And so we, this project really inspired me because it's a very specific project. It's protecting the corridor, this corridor. And so to date, we have a whole ranger um, program in place protecting 50,000 acres that we've managed to protect, but we need to protect 300,000. And so we're working every day to try to make this happen.
Hmm.
And it, again, like climate change, this whole area, um, time is of the essence because it's one of the last remaining intact and like so beautiful, so biodiverse places on Earth, but it's starting to get destroyed. And so time is of the essence to protect it. And so we feel like we have like a year and a half basically to try to get to the 300,000 acres that we want to protect.
How can people help in
Yeah. Well, if you want to share our website, it's junglekeepers.com. And in terms of just like small donations, it's incredible what it can do, because we just bought a concession that just came from small individual donations. And the thing is, like, if we're able to, it's such an incredible project, because if we can protect this whole corridor, it just makes such a huge impact in the Amazon. And so we have funding to do this work, but we're about $15 million short to do the whole project. And if we could get $15 million,
just $15 million.
Exactly. But it's
are
a
you
lot
planning a big concert? Like,
exactly.
How are you going to raise that $15 million?
Well, I believe in miracles, and we've already gotten very, very far in this project, because we're already we're 1/6 of the way there. If we're 1/6 of the way there, we can get
250,000 more acres to protect and save in the Peruvian Amazon, and now you're raising $15 million via changemakers.com.
Exactly.
And then that's how people can help.
Corridor.
And is there any other way that people can help other than donation?
If people raising awareness, so coming to our research station, talking about it, being just being advocates for the movement is huge.
And where is your research station? That would be in the Amazon?
Yeah, in the Peruvian Amazon, in the mountains.
I will come gladly.
Yeah, come. Yeah, we can do an interview there.
Gladly go there, record some episodes.
Yeah, exactly. That's amazing. There's a film crew there right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What is it about?
There's always something, like different
going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you so much for all this information. Now I want to talk about Rebecca Foon, the businesswoman. Listen, people, there's a lot of multi-hyphenates, especially in this day and age. People have been going through, like, waking up to a million possibilities. And I think it's beautiful to see someone like you who can be an artist and in the music, but also the arts. We'll talk about that a little bit more. In a climate activist and also a businesswoman, a business person. So tell us a little bit more about the business ventures that you created. One of them is Modo Yoga with hot yoga studios. There was one in Venice, 10 minutes away from me. It's closed, but there's others.
I know. I was part of that studio.
My goal was to go try before the episode, because I haven't done hot yoga in a while. Anywho. And then there's another business that you also created, which is a sustainable retail brand. Super interested about that one. So let's start with Modo Yoga. Sure. How did it come to be? What is its mission?
Yeah, so actually my friend Jessica Robertson had started the Modo Yoga she had some Bikram studios and had changed them into Modo Yoga because she was very interested in sustainability and green construction and sustainable, like thinking about sustainability in terms of the health and longevity of the body and the spine.
Yeah. Sustainability of the human being.
Exactly.
What about that?
The air we breathe, our bodies, our vertebra. Totally. And so I was very interested in this whole modality of this whole way of thinking. And because I was touring a lot at the time, and my friend Sarah, who also is a violinist and plays in Arcade Fire, she also was touring a lot. And
I love Arcade Fire.
Oh.
I like Regine as well. She's like a Haitian.
Yeah.
Inspiration from like seeing Haitian people venture in different initiatives and bands and careers.
Incredible. Absolutely. Yeah, so we decided we wanted to do a yoga training together. So we decided to do Modo yoga training in India and then in Kerala. And then we came back and we're so excited about it and our yoga practice. And we started teaching in Montreal. And then we decided, we should open a yoga studio in New York because we're like starting to play more in New York, and we really want to have more access to New York City as Canadians. And it's always kind of tricky to figure that out. And so we were like, well, why don't we open a yoga studio there? And then we can still play music and integrate music with yoga. And then also
have a footprint somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And so we got so lucky because we found this beautiful space above the Joffrey Ballet, or below the Joffrey Ballet School in the West Village, in Greenwich Village, on 10th Street and 6th Ave. And things went really well for us. We're so grateful because it just seems such that New Yorkers love practicing hot yoga.
And it's a good location. It's a good
amazing location. We scored with the location, and then we scored with the Williamsburg location
as well. So how do you manage it from a distance? Because you're in Japan, then you're in Paris, and you're in LA, and then how do you manage it all from afar?
Well, it's changed over time because it's now been over 10 years, and so now we have a full management team that's running the studios, and so I'm teaching less now, but it's been amazing to just help build a community of yogis in New York City, and then also integrate music into Sarah and I sometimes do live music classes there, and
it's been fun.
So wonderful. I'm so
Let me
grateful.
know when you have one in LA.
I sure will. Absolutely.
I'll go.
Absolutely.
I'm a big hot yoga fan. I haven't done it in a while. Since I left the Bay Area, I haven't really been there. But no, it's super interesting. And then let's talk a little bit more about your retail, eco-conscious retail brand that's also around yoga. So it's, from what I understand, it's apparel for yogis to go do what they love.
Exactly. So we, because of hot yoga, you do need like specific types of leggings, so that because you sweat so much.
I was not aware of that. I come as I am, and then I sweat it out.
It's not true. You can wear whatever you want. Everybody wears whatever they want. But we did realize that the certain type of material, which comes from recycled bottles, it kind of like captures the sweat and just makes it less hot.
I want to pause because I love it. So you created yoga pants and yoga gear based out of recycled bottles.
Bottles, exactly.
Tell me more about the whole process.
Well, we did a whole, we did probably a few years of research in terms of looking at materials and different, different manufacturers. And so we found this specific material that came from recycled bottles, and we wanted to make them in Vancouver, like make them in North America. And so that took a whole like bunch of time to try to just like figure all that out. But we did
finding the recipe or finding the material. And then why did you want it in Vancouver specifically?
Well, we wanted to, it could be anywhere in North America, but we found a place in Vancouver.
Okay.
And because we wanted to try to keep it as local as possible. Because we're distributing, mostly selling in North America, and our yoga studios are mostly in North America.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, so that's why. And then, but the whole concept behind it, beyond the recycled bottles, is it's directly tied to jungle keepers. So a portion of the sales go to supporting the purchasing of concessions and the ranger program for jungle keepers, but also I guess celebrating our love of nature and our love of the Amazon, and from our time there. So photographs that we take collectively as a team in the Amazon of animals and nature are integrated into the pants. So it's all like Amazon. That's why it's called Yoga for Air. We might move beyond the Amazon, but since we started, it's been all
yoga for CO2. They thought CO2 was not sexy enough, so we're going to call it for air.
For air, exactly.
I would not have known, but I love it. Yoga for air. And then you talked about like purchasing concessions. Can you give more details for our audience of what are concessions?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many different concessions along the corridor. Basically are owned by different people, and some of those some of those concessions are protected by people that care, like nonprofits or
Yeah.
that are very focused on conservation or ecotourism, but some are, because like the economics of life over there can be so tricky. Deforestation and mining are always an issue. Illegal activities of like extracting natural resources is always
It
an
happens in
issue.
so many places. It's
Yeah,
and I feel like
exactly.
it's not as policed as it should or could be.
Yeah, and so part of our mandate and way of thinking about it is also to how do we create opportunities, because we're working so closely with indigenous communities there, and also how do we create opportunities for, say, like someone who is cutting down trees illegally for money. How
Hmm.
can we give up a different opportunity, kind of like fossil fuels, like switching from coal to like renewable energy for
Yeah.
job employment, let's say. So how can we create jobs for miners or legal miners or illegal loggers?
So it's kind of
And so
replacing what they're doing with something that will be more sustainable while they can still
exactly,
feed their families because they're doing it
exactly,
because I understand. So you're trying to change the behavior by creating new opportunities that would be as compelling, but would not have an impact on the environment.
exactly. Yeah.
That's it.
So
Yeah.
through our ranger program and now we're trying to integrate like different all sorts of different programs, and even bringing yoga to different communities. And we have, so our there's different branches to Jungle Keepers. There's a Peruvian branch and a US branch that is more about fundraising, and a Canadian
Mhm.
branch is also more about fundraising. So but we have a whole Peruvian team um, that's more on the ground, engaging with local communities there.
I'll go watch some videos. I'm super inspired, and
Amazing.
I'll see if there's opportunities down the line. But thank you so
It's
much
so
for what you
great.
do. I think it's incredible, and I'll check your retail brand as well. Is it all direct to consumer online, or do you have any distribution elsewhere?
Yeah, there's this distribution right now at the studios, at the yoga
Mhm.
studios, but you can also can buy online.
Amazing. I wanted to talk
Yeah.
a little bit more about we talked about you as an artist, as a composer, cellist, a singer, all those
Mm.
talents. But on top of that, you started doing more of visual arts. So one of the things that when we researched, we saw that you ventured into the world of visual arts with an art exhibit that's called Ascension. And it raises awareness about climate change and also talked about the collective responsibility, collective consciousness. So can you tell us a little bit more about Ascension and also you venturing into really being a multi-alphabet artist, but doing non-musical, like pure art creations?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah. So basically, the concept is I started making these large scale light boxes of protected areas in the world, of natural air, like forests, basically,
Mhm.
or um,
What if, for the audience, what is a light box?
so it's basically eight. They're between 6 to 8 feet by 4 feet wide and
Hmm.
tall. And it's they're photographs of the natural world. Um, so there's no sense of civilization in the photographs, and they're lit up by LED lights enclosed in a wood frame. So it's like it's meant to be a portal, and most of them are rectangular, but I started making large circular ones as well.
Hmm.
And so the whole concept is it's kind of this weird juxtaposition, because here we are in a world where we're trying to figure out this massive, horrific problem with regards to climate
Climate change.
justice and climate
Yeah.
change. Um, and then also, but I'm capturing like conservation areas. And so,
I have a quote from you that because
yeah.
it's super captivating. And
Mhm.
captivating is coming from you have an artist statement that you published that says that your light boxes serve as captivating portals, and we'll double click on the word portal, which
Mhm.
highlight the environment we are rapidly losing. So when I hear portal, I feel like we're shifting in a different dimension, but maybe it's just me. So what do you mean by these captivating portals?
Yeah, so it's this idea that like maybe soon these portals will, it's kind of like raising this idea, which hopefully won't be the case, but where these portals in reality won't exist so much anymore because we will have destroyed most of our planet and its natural resources. And all that's left is these memories of what nature was. And so
So
we're
your
not
art
there.
is like an artifact. So you're taking a copy of the world as it used to be when we had nature. Let's say
Exactly.
50
In
years from
50
yeah.
years. But
Wow.
hopefully this is not the case. But
Yeah.
it's the idea of it is kind of imagining like what if these portals are just the memories and all we have are these architectural spaces with the memories of them through these light boxes. So
I think
it's
it's important because it's important for us to just not think, because sometimes we think about the past, we think about the
yeah,
present, but then sometimes we don't spend enough time creating the future. And I think what your
yeah,
art is doing is, of course, raising awareness around a gloomy future if we don't do anything, but also making us present about the beauty that surrounds us, which is nature.
exactly.
And also,
Exactly.
I haven't seen them, but I'm going to put them on my list when I go
Mm.
in this art gallery in Montreal. So, but it's interesting. And how did you choose the medium of photography in light boxes? How
You
did
know,
it come?
I was I was visiting um, a friend in Berlin who had Olafur Eliasson in his studio, and he had this huge. He had one of his his collaborators had made a big light box, and I saw it, and it was like completely different type of format and photography. But I kind of I just got inspired, and I was like, oh wow, I want to start taking photographs, and so I borrowed a camera because I need like a very high res camera to like be able
Mhm.
to blow up photographs that big. And so he lent me a camera and I went walking around in Berlin and went into the park. There's beautiful parks in Berlin. And so I just started like walking around in this park in Berlin, was so blown away. And it reminded me of Canada, of Quebec actually. It was just in terms of the trees and the
It's
water, and
beautiful.
so beautiful. And so I just started taking like a million photographs, and and then when I came back, I started doing again like that research recipe of like how do I turn these into. I just want to make like massive art experiences with these photographs. And so I found someone in Montreal that kind of helped me think through it all and customize how to like build
I love
build.
it.
Yeah.
It's so inspiring. I mean, we take
Oh,
a little bit nature for granted, but I think it's good to pause and admire and ponder on that. So thank you for doing that, and I'm super excited. You have another quote here. It's and you talked about it a little bit, but I think it's important for me just to read it for us to be able to sit with this information. It's
mhm.
just a position of nature's grandeur against the backdrop of the constructed and built contemporary gallery environment showcases the irony of our desire to bring nature into our architectural spaces while neglecting its preservation outside of those confines. And if I translate that, it means that you're going to put beautifully curated um, greening in your architecture, your houses, and whatnot. But what you already have that's uncurated is not being protected. It
Mhm.
feels like you're not walking the talk, and it's like slam, bam, bam, slam. It's like
Yeah, exactly.
reality check. It's a reality check.
Exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
all part of your artist statement of why you're doing what it's amazing because I feel like art is also one way to advocate for change. And as we wrap this up, I want to make sure I ask you because a lot of people feel like they have different passions or multi-hyphenates and
Mhm.
want to know how can I be a business person and also an artist and be like a renaissance person and also be an activist. So I think one of the questions for you is what are your top three career tips for people who want to be able to create projects and drive a lot of impact in the world,
Yeah.
but feeling the freedom of doing these things across disciplines.
Yeah, I think, my dad always says, like, you have to just do what you love in order to stay fulfilled as a human. And I think it first and foremost comes down to that, to like really tap into your passions. And I think we're here on earth to awaken our hearts and share our passions. And through sharing what we love, we wake up our heart and we also inspire others.
Hmm.
And I think that equation is just so important in terms of also protecting our earth, because like it's really about falling in love with our planet and each other and life, falling in love with life. And so for me, what's been really helpful is is finding my passions, but then trying to pursue them. And some make money, some don't,
Hmm.
but I can kind of integrate them all together. So like I put my light boxes up at the yoga studios, and people
Yeah.
can see the light boxes, and the yoga studios can create funding to support jungle keepers or support Pathway to Paris or Thousand Cities or support me. And then through that, I can make some music, and maybe one album is a love project, and maybe another album generates some income.
Hmm.
But it's kind of like this juggle game of
It's free
multiple
flowing. It's like
free flowing.
creating based on your passions. Feel compelled to freely flow, knowing that some of the ventures are going to be lucrative, some are not. Those are passion projects. But as
Yeah,
my Reiki healer said a couple
yeah,
of years ago, I think it's important to be balanced as a human. And then some of us need to be creative. Some of us need to express their creativity and also while they do business and vice versa. So I think it's a
exactly.
so follow your
And
passion is the first advice, and then free flowing, right? Being clear
exactly.
about what's going to bring back, be lucrative and what's not. And what is the third tip that you have?
Maybe the power of creativity in the human imagination, because the more we can imagine, the more we can put things into action that are
Hmm.
maybe beyond our wildest dreams. And so you just keep dreaming bigger, and then you can create more innovative ideas into reality. And so it's the same with like when we talk about like sustainable cities, the more we can envision and dream beyond our wildest dreams, these like incredible, gorgeous cities in terms of
Hmm.
incorporating nature and going off of fossil fuels and equitable and just cities, the more we can begin to understand how to make it happen.
And
Or
create a path to bring this vision to life.
yeah, and I think in terms of cultivating the human imagination, a big part of it is like opening up your own personal channel, and like through that being creative. I think being creative is fundamental to being human, whether you're
Yeah.
an artist or not, just in terms of like thinking, ways of seeing, ways of being in the world is so important. And that opens our hearts, and that leads to more compassion, more love, more ways of connecting
Yeah.
to to all beings on earth, which
And I think
is
it's so important because I was listening to another podcast and they were talking about like the richness of your life is based on the quality of your relationships, right?
wow.
It's not a pile of money is not necessarily going to make you happier. Is what are
Yeah.
these key relationships that you have, that you nurture, that give you energy, nurture you, but also bring you joy and fulfillment. So I think
Yeah.
as what you're saying is the power of creativity, expressing yourself, connecting with the collective, like kindred souls, is probably going to be good for you in terms of quality and longevity of your life, but also for self actualization, feeling free to flow between different ventures without having to be pigeonholed into like, I'm a business person or I'm an artist. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing
Oh,
all your wisdom. And I think another question I have for you is we're here, Driving Impact is about making sure that we're able to take baby steps towards climate action, towards
mhm.
AI, and developing your own leadership and career. And looking at the global economy, what are three actions you think our audience can take to be able to drive impact in climate action?
Climate, yeah.
In
Well,
simple actions that have a lot of impact. None.
absolutely. I know, and it's so tricky. I do think engagement is huge. So engaging with your community and engaging with the politicians within your community, so within your municipalities, to try to vocalize to try to be part of the conversation in terms of designing the urban planning of your community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really do think writing letters I'll give you a quick little story in terms of divestment. I think divestment is huge. So pushing for divestment within your city, your state. Like at Carnegie Hall, Bill McKibben asked everybody to write a letter to Comptroller Scott Stringer at the time and Mayor de Blasio at the time in 2017 to divest New York City's pension funds into renewable focus projects. And we sent 3,000 letters out to them. And a few weeks later, they had made the announcement around New York City and New York State's divestments. And those are two of the top 20.
That's a big impact. So
yeah,
you got 3,000 people to write letters to divest, to change the funds, pension funds, to more sustainable, renewable energy.
exactly.
Funds. And they did it.
Yeah, and like we were like the light switch that like helped trigger it. There was years of activism leading up to that and pressure, but it's amazing what letters can do if you create a little movement around it. Like if a bunch of people can do it at the same time, you can. That really taught me, and the fact that happened then inspired the City of London to do the same thing, because cities look at each other, in terms of best practices and leadership. So that was like a real aha moment. Awakening moment for me. I was like, oh wow,
it matters. Writing the letters matter.
It does matter, especially when it's a collective, like when you get a whole bunch of people doing it at the same time.
That's huge.
And divestment is huge because that's a massive shift in the economy. And so that's one thing I think is huge, and if in terms of like behavioral best practices, like of
Can
course,
you define the word divestment? I want to make sure everybody's clear. Like what do we
like
mean
just
when we say we should divest?
Like shifting. So let's just say you bank with Chase, and Chase is like supporting a lot of different oil companies, for example. To look at, this is just like say on a micro example, to look
voting
at
with your dollars and not investing in companies that are detrimental to the environment and sustainable planet. Just divestment would be removing your financial investment
somewhere else.
Yes,
exactly.
Investing in companies that are sustainable and that are good for the planet.
Exactly, 100%.
Awesome. So you had writing letters. The power of engagement was the first tip. The second tip was divestment. And what was the third one?
Oh yeah, I said the power of engagement, divestment. Yeah, so there is behavioral change in terms of the individual and trying to, I think, really engage in the local economy. So in terms of thinking about the food you eat, supporting local food, urban agriculture, or like community gardens, or like
farmers markets,
thinking about what you're eating, thinking about your garbage, thinking about like how you're living in terms of your purchases and your investments again. And trying to inspire, like we're not going to get there, I don't think, through one-on-one actions, but we get there through collective action. So like the more we can, it's kind of that thing, like the more we can inspire our own lives and then have that wave trickle into our communities is amazing.
Educate each other.
In terms of government, and then putting pressure, like say you want to put solar panels on your roof and there's new funding out there, or putting pressure to have funding out there. Share whatever knowledge or resources you have with others. Of course, like
make it a reality.
Yeah, because it's an economic issue, absolutely. Like in terms of going from the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, it's expensive, and there's a whole economic challenge there. So the more that our governments can support that and put initiatives in place, put composting initiatives in place, put renewable energy, change the grid, like all of these things, like it's going to take billions and billions and billions of dollars to get there. So of course, like one action is just one action, but but it's part of a whole
You
movement.
compounded, yeah. If it
Yeah,
the compounded action from the collective
exactly.
can change the trajectory of a planet. And sometimes
Absolutely.
we just think that we don't matter, but actually we do. And
Yeah.
even more if we can bring the whole collective with us as we start shifting our actions. I want to ask you the last uh, question for you, which is, what is the biggest impact that you've driven in your whole life? I don't know if it's the 3,000 letters or
I think it might be, honestly. Like it
okay.
was Bill McKibben's idea and we supported him, but that was revolutionary. I couldn't believe it. Like to see that, because those two pools of money are part of the 20 biggest pools of money in the world. And to see that happen. And also like with pushing for the Paris Agreement too. I know our little concerts didn't make the Paris Agreement happen or anything, but just like being part of a
That
movement like
movement.
that, it felt very powerful, and I felt like we are just part of waves in the ocean, but
Mhm.
there's like something spiritual about kind of being tapped in to a collective movement and a collective consciousness that's like
100%. And
forefront.
artists are the voice of humanity oftentimes, and it just
Yeah,
transcends, right? You can connect via music and everybody like sharing a common consciousness. So I do think that the concerts you put together with all those big names around the Paris Agreement is also it's a beautiful way to raise awareness.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I feel like I've learned so much from you today, and it's also inspiring to see like a multi-hyphenate, a Renaissance woman, someone who's able to go from the arts to business to climate change and really like take it on yourself to really drive impact for the planet. So thank you so much for all your time, your energy, and your contribution. Super
Oh,
excited.
thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. It's an honor.